The rain had started before sunrise. By 7 in the morning, the hallways of Westfield Academy smelled like wet shoes, old books, and freshly cleaned floors. Students rushed through the entrance with expensive backpacks and steaming coffee cups, while luxury cars lined up outside the school gates. And in the middle of it all, Samuel Reed pushed his old janitor cart quietly down the hallway. Most people barely noticed him. Some students nodded politely. Others walked past him like he was invisible. Samuel was used to that. At 58 years old, with tired eyes and rough hands, he had learned long ago that the world only noticed certain kinds of people. Teachers, principals, rich parents, successful students, not janitors. Still, every morning, Samuel arrived before everyone else. He swept the halls, repaired broken desks, unclogged sinks, and cleaned messes no one else wanted to touch. Because someone had to. And despite everything life had taken from him, he still believed dignity mattered. Even in silence. Especially in silence. That morning felt different somehow. Heavy. Like the air itself carried sadness. Samuel had just finished mopping the east hallway when he heard something unusual. A muffled sob. He stopped pushing the cart. Another cry followed. Soft. Broken. Coming from somewhere near the old music room. Samuel frowned slightly and walked toward the sound. The hallway there was usually empty this early. As he got closer, he noticed the classroom door cracked open just a little. Inside, someone was crying. Not dramatic crying. Not attention-seeking crying. The kind of crying that came from trying desperately not to be heard. Samuel slowly knocked. The crying stopped immediately. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a small voice whispered nervously, "Go away." Samuel hesitated. Most people probably would have left. But something about that voice reminded him painfully of someone he once knew. Someone he had lost. He gently pushed the door open. A young girl sat on the floor beside the piano, hugging her knees tightly against her chest. She couldn't have been older than 13. Her school blazer was perfectly neat, but tears covered her face. Samuel recognized her immediately. Emily Carter. One of the top students in middle school. Quiet. Polite. Always carrying books against her chest. The daughter of Principal Victoria Carter. Samuel had seen her many times during assemblies. But never like this. Emily quickly wiped her eyes and looked away in embarrassment. I said go away. Samuel leaned lightly against the doorway. Well, he said softly, I'm not very good at following instructions. For the first time, Emily looked up at him. Not because the joke was funny. Because she hadn't expected one. Samuel slowly stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I won't ask what happened, he said gently, but no one should cry alone. Emily looked like she was fighting herself internally. Like part of her wanted to speak, and another part was terrified too. Finally, she whispered, People don't care. Samuel nodded slowly. Some don't. Her lips trembled. You don't even know me. No, Samuel admitted, but I know sadness when I see it. That answer broke something inside her. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. Samuel quietly grabbed a tissue box from the teacher's desk and placed it beside her before sitting on a nearby chair. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough. After several long moments, Emily finally spoke. Do you think someone can disappear, even if they're still alive? Samuel's expression changed slightly. That wasn't a normal question for a 13-year-old. He answered carefully. Yes. Emily stared at the floor. That's how I feel. Samuel stayed silent. Sometimes people didn't need advice. They needed space to empty the pain they'd been carrying. And eventually, Emily began talking. At first slowly. Then all at once. My mom is always busy. She runs the school. She's always helping other students. She remembers everyone's names. She gives speeches about kindness. But at home, Emily swallowed hard. At home, she barely talks to me anymore. Samuel listened carefully. She used to, Emily continued, when Dad was alive. Now he understood. She changed after he died, Emily whispered. I know she's hurting too, but it's like she stopped seeing me. The room felt smaller suddenly. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Samuel's chest tightened painfully because Emily's words reopened wounds he had spent years trying to bury. His own wife had died 15 years earlier. Cancer. Vast. Cruel. Afterward, his son blamed him for not saving her. Their relationship shattered slowly after that. Now they barely spoke. Loss had a way of breaking families differently. Some people cried together. Others drifted apart while standing in the same house. Samuel looked at Emily carefully. You miss your father. Emily nodded immediately. Every child who loses a parent learns a terrible skill early. How to hide pain from adults. But not from someone who has suffered too. I still talk to him sometimes, she admitted quietly. Samuel smiled sadly. That's not strange. You think so? I do it too. Emily blinked. You do? Samuel nodded. To my wife. For the first time, Emily looked genuinely curious instead of sad. What was she like? Samuel's eyes softened instantly. She laughed loudly. Emily smiled faintly. She sounds nice. She was. A silence followed again. But this one felt warmer. Safer. And for the first time that morning, Emily's breathing began calming down. Then suddenly, the classroom door swung open violently. Emily. Principal Victoria Carter stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. Her expensive coat was soaked from the rain outside. Two teachers stood behind her anxiously. The principal's eyes immediately locked onto Samuel. Then to her daughter, sitting on the floor crying. Her expression hardened instantly. What is going on here? Emily froze. Samuel quickly stood up. She was upset. I can see that. Her sharp tone cut through the room. One teacher exchanged an awkward glance with the other. Victoria stepped closer protectively. Why are you alone with my daughter? The accusation in her voice hit Samuel like a slap. Emily immediately stood. Mom, stop. But Victoria wasn't listening. Years of pressure, stress, grief, responsibility, and fear exploded in that moment. I trusted this staff, she snapped, and now I find my daughter crying alone with the janitor, Samuel finished quietly. The room fell silent. Victoria realized too late how cruel she sounded. But pride kept her from backing down. Emily looked horrified. He didn't do anything wrong. Victoria ignored her. Samuel, please leave the room. Samuel stared at Emily for one brief second. The girl looked devastated. Not because she was embarrassed. Because someone who had finally listened to her was being treated like he mattered less. Samuel gave a small nod. Of course. He quietly grabbed his cart and walked out. No anger. No argument. Just quiet dignity. But Emily would never forget the look in his eyes as he left. Not hurt. Not even humiliation. Just disappointment. Like he was used to being judged unfairly. And somehow, that made it worse. The next few days felt strange for Emily. She kept thinking about Samuel. About the way he listened. The way he never interrupted her. The way he somehow understood pain without needing explanations. Meanwhile, at home, things with her mother only became colder. Victoria was constantly working. Emails during dinner. Phone calls late at night. Meetings on weekends. Every conversation felt rushed. artificial. Emily wanted to scream sometimes. Not because her mother was mean. Because she acted like grief could be managed with schedules and productivity. One evening during dinner, Emily finally asked quietly, "Why were you so rude to Mr. Reed?" Victoria barely looked up from her laptop. "I was protecting you. He was helping me." Victoria sighed tiredly. "You're too young to understand." Emily pushed her plate away. "No, you just don't listen." That got Victoria's attention. The room became tense instantly. Emily stood up. "He treated me more like family in 10 minutes than you have in months." And then she walked upstairs before her mother could answer. Victoria sat frozen at the table. The words hit harder than Emily realized. Because deep down, Victoria feared they were true. The next morning, Emily searched for Samuel before classes started. She finally found him repairing a locker near the gym hallway. When he noticed her approaching, he smiled gently. "Good morning." Emily looked guilty. "I'm sorry about my mom." Samuel shook his head immediately. "You don't apologize for adults. She shouldn't have talked to you like that." Samuel tightened a screw calmly. "People say things when they're scared." Emily crossed her arms. She wasn't scared, she was angry. Samuel looked at her carefully. Sometimes those are the same thing. Emily didn't know how to answer that. Samuel stood slowly, stretching his back. "How are you feeling today?" Emily hesitated. "Still sad." "Good." She blinked in confusion. "What?" Samuel chuckled softly. "Not good that you're sad, good that you're honest." That almost made her smile again. Then Samuel reached into his cart and handed her a small, folded paper crane. Emily looked surprised. "You made this?" "My wife taught me years ago." Emily carefully unfolded it slightly. There were tiny words written inside. Heavy hearts still beat. Emily stared at the message silently. And for the first time since her father died, she felt like maybe someone finally understood the emptiness she carried. But neither of them noticed someone watching from the end of the hallway. Principal Victoria Carter. And the expression on her face wasn't anger anymore. It was confusion. Because for the first time in nearly a year, she had just seen her daughter smile. Principal Victoria Carter stood motionless at the end of the hallway. Students walked around her in noisy clusters, lockers slammed shut, teachers hurried toward classrooms. But all she could focus on was Emily's smile. A small smile. Fragile, but real. And she hadn't seen one like that in a very long time. Victoria watched as Samuel handed Emily the paper crane. She watched the way he spoke calmly, the way her daughter actually listened. No tension, no fear, no emotional distance. Just comfort. Something Victoria had been trying and failing to give her own child for months. A painful feeling settled in her chest. Guilt. She quietly turned and walked away before either of them noticed her. But the image stayed with her all day, especially during lunch. Because Emily laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for Victoria to hear it from across the cafeteria. And that sound nearly broke her heart, because she realized something terrifying. Her daughter was becoming happier around a janitor than around her own mother. That night, Victoria sat alone in her office long after everyone left school. Rain hit the large windows softly, while stacks of paperwork covered her desk untouched. Normally, she would have kept working. Tonight she couldn't focus. Her eyes drifted toward the framed family photo beside the lamp. Her husband Daniel stood in the center, smiling warmly with one arm around Emily and the other around Victoria. The picture had been taken 3 years earlier. Before the accident. Before everything changed. Victoria slowly picked up the frame. "You would have known what to do," she whispered painfully. But silence was the only answer. She closed her eyes, and memories flooded back. Daniel reading bedtime stories to Emily, family movie nights, Sunday breakfasts, the warmth their house used to carry. After his death, Victoria had convinced herself she needed to stay strong. Strong for the school, strong for the students, strong for Emily. So she buried herself in work, schedules, meetings, responsibility, because slowing down meant feeling the grief. And grief felt unbearable. But somewhere along the way, she stopped noticing that Emily was grieving too. A tear rolled down Victoria's cheek before she quickly wiped it away. Then another followed, and another. Soon she was crying harder than she had allowed herself to cry in over a year. Alone in her office, finally breaking under the weight she had carried silently. Meanwhile, Samuel sat quietly in his tiny apartment across town. The television played softly in the background, though he wasn't watching it. Instead, he stared at an old photograph in his hands. His wife, Clara, smiling in a sunflower field. The edges of the picture were worn from years of being touched. Samuel thought about Emily, about the sadness in her eyes, and about Principal Carter. He understood her more than she realized. Grief changed people in ugly ways sometimes. Not because they stopped loving others, because pain consumed so much energy that they forgot how to show love properly. Samuel sighed heavily and placed the photo back carefully. Then his phone buzzed unexpectedly. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello. A pause. Then a familiar voice. This is Victoria Carter. Samuel sat upright immediately. Oh, Principal Carter. Another silence. This one uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke quietly. I owe you an apology. Samuel looked genuinely surprised. You were helping my daughter. Her voice cracked slightly. And I treated you unfairly. Samuel leaned back slowly. That's kind of you to say. No, Victoria whispered. It's overdue. Samuel remained silent. Then she said something unexpected. She talks about you. Samuel blinked. She does. All the time lately. Despite himself, Samuel smiled faintly. That's nice. Victoria's voice softened further. She hasn't opened up to anyone since her father died. Samuel's expression turned sad. She misses him deeply. I know. But the way Victoria said those words revealed something painful. She knew. Yet she still didn't know how to reach her own daughter. Samuel understood immediately. Sometimes love wasn't enough by itself. Sometimes people needed help finding their way back to each other. Victoria hesitated before speaking again. Would you maybe have coffee with us tomorrow after school? Samuel frowned slightly. With you and Emily. Yes. He was quiet for several seconds. Then finally, I'd like that. The next afternoon, Emily nearly dropped her books when she saw Samuel sitting in the school cafe beside her mother. What's happening? Victoria stood awkwardly. We're having coffee together. Emily looked suspicious instantly. With him? Samuel chuckled softly. That offended me a little. Emily almost smiled. Almost. But she still looked confused. Victoria took a slow breath. I wanted to apologize properly. Emily crossed her arms. To him or to me? The question hit harder than intended. Victoria looked down briefly. To both. Silence settled over the table. Then Samuel gently pulled out a chair. Sit, he said kindly, before this turns into a courtroom. That finally earned a small laugh from Emily. She sat. At first the conversation felt stiff. Awkward. Careful. But Samuel had a strange gift. He made people feel safe without trying too hard. Soon Emily was talking about books again, about music, about school. And slowly, even more surprisingly, Victoria started talking too. Not like a principal, like a mother, like a grieving wife, like a human being exhausted from pretending to be strong all the time. At one point, Emily looked at her carefully. "You never talk about Dad anymore." Victoria froze. Samuel quietly looked away, giving them space. Victoria swallowed hard. "Because it hurts." Emily's eyes filled instantly. "It hurts me too." Those 6 words shattered the wall between them. Victoria covered her mouth as tears formed again. Emily looked terrified suddenly, like she regretted saying it. But then Victoria reached across the table and grabbed her daughter's hand tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered brokenly. Emily stared at her. "I'm so sorry I disappeared." And just like that, both of them started crying. Not polite tears, real ones. The kind grief forces out after being trapped too long. Samuel quietly stood up. "I'll give you two some privacy." But Emily grabbed his sleeve quickly. "Don't go." He looked surprised. "You're part of this now." Those words hit Samuel harder than she knew. Because after years of loneliness, after years of feeling invisible, someone had finally made him feel needed again. So he sat back down quietly while mother and daughter cried beside him. And for the first time in a long time, none of them felt alone. Over the following weeks, something beautiful began changing at Westfield Academy. Emily started smiling more often. Victoria began leaving work earlier. Sometimes students even saw the principal walking through hallways with her daughter after school. Talking. Actually talking. But another change happened too. Victoria started noticing Samuel differently. Not as the janitor. As a person. She noticed students greeting him warmly. Teachers asking him for advice. Nervous children calming down around him. He remembered birthdays. Fixed broken things without being asked. Encouraged struggling students quietly when no one else noticed. He carried kindness in the smallest actions. And suddenly, Victoria felt ashamed. Because she realized the school's most important person might have been the man everyone overlooked daily. One afternoon, she walked into the auditorium and found Samuel repairing old stage lights alone. "You know," she said softly, "I've worked here 8 years." Samuel glanced down from the ladder. "And I don't think I ever properly saw you." Samuel smiled sadly. "That happens." "No," Victoria replied firmly. "It shouldn't." She meant that. Deeply. A few days later, she announced something unexpected during the weekly school assembly. Students filled the gymnasium noisily, while teachers stood along the walls. Samuel remained near the back as usual, unnoticed. Victoria stepped to the microphone. Before beginning announcements, she paused. "There's someone I need to thank publicly today." The room quieted. Victoria looked toward the back of the gym. "Mr. Samuel Reed." Samuel looked startled immediately as hundreds of students turned toward him. Victoria continued. "This school talks a lot about character, compassion, and humanity." Her voice grew emotional. "But recently, I realized one of the people who demonstrates those values best is someone many of us overlook every day." Samuel looked uncomfortable already. Victoria smiled gently. "Mr. Reed has served this school for 14 years. Students began whispering. "He fixes what's broken." A pause. "Not only in this building, but in people too." Now the gym was completely silent. Victoria's eyes became watery. "He reminded me recently that kindness matters most when no one is watching." Samuel lowered his eyes, clearly overwhelmed. Then Victoria said the words no one expected. "Westfield Academy is better because of him." And suddenly, the students started clapping. Not forced applause. Real applause. Growing louder. And louder. Teachers joined in. Then everyone stood. A full standing ovation. Samuel looked stunned. Emily clapped hardest of all, tears streaming down her face proudly. For a moment, Samuel didn't know what to do. He had spent years being invisible. Now an entire school stood for him. Victoria walked off the stage and handed him the microphone gently. Samuel stared at the crowd nervously. Then finally said, "I just cleaned floors." A few students laughed softly through tears. Samuel smiled faintly. "But I've learned something." The room listened carefully. People carry pain you cannot see. Silence spread through the gym. So be kind. His voice cracked slightly. That's all. Nothing fancy. Nothing dramatic. Yet somehow, those words affected everyone. Because they were true. Later that evening, Emily sat beside Samuel outside the school while the sunset painted the sky orange. "You changed everything," she told him quietly. Samuel shook his head. "No." He looked toward the school building. "You and your mother did that yourselves." Emily smiled softly. "Still." Samuel glanced at her. "You know your father would be proud of you." Emily's eyes filled slightly. "You think so?" "I know so." For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Emily asked something small, but important. "Will you still talk to me after I grow up?" Samuel smiled warmly. "Paper cranes don't expire." Emily laughed through tears. And for the first time since losing her father, the future no longer felt empty. Because sometimes healing begins in unexpected places. Sometimes the people society overlooks carry the deepest wisdom. And sometimes, a janitor helping a crying little girl can save an entire family without even realizing it.